Welcome to the Resilience Report, where we go beyond the headlines to spotlight the trailblazers redefining sustainable business. I'm your host, Lauren Scott. In each episode, I sit down with ecopreneurs and lighthouse leaders, visionaries, who are tackling our planet's toughest challenges and proving that business can be a force for good. Thanks for joining me as we explore what's possible and what's next on the path to a more resilient future. One of the biggest questions I hear from leaders, founders, and changemakers is this: how do we actually measure the impact we're trying to make? Because caring about people, communities, and the planet is one thing, but being able to prove real, measurable change is something else entirely. Our guest today lives at this perfect intersection of purpose and proof. Neil Callanan is the founder of LooseGrip and the creator of Grasp Impact Framework, which helps mission-driven brands connect meaningful storytelling with measurable outcomes. Since 2009, he's worked with both global brands like Unilever and Ben Jerry's and emerging values-led companies to turn impact into real business growth. Neil's work sits at the crossroads of marketing, activism, and analytics, helping teams move beyond disconnected data or pure intuition, and instead translate stories into metrics that actually hold up. His goal is simple: help leaders measure what truly matters so that they can do more of it. So if you're a business leader or entrepreneur who is trying to think of how to better measure and communicate your own impact, this episode is for you. Welcome back to another episode of the Resilience Report. This is going to be such a good one for our listeners because so much of our audience, we're focused on having a positive impact within our respective communities and businesses. I'd say both on the environmental and social sides. But what a lot of our listeners have had a challenge with is how do we quantify or how do we justify this impact? And today we have someone who has really dedicated a bulk of their career to this very area. So with that, I would love to welcome Neil to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So to dive into that topic, I'm certainly somebody at the top of the list who wants to have a positive impact through the work that I'm doing. And at the same time, I think having that positive impact within our communities is also really hard to justify. Sometimes it feels a little bit qualitative and we can't really show the true impact that we're having. So where did you initially see those initial gaps? And then what was the kind of the catalyst for you to solve for that gap?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would love to say that we started kind of the activism journey first and then sort of figured out how to apply that to brands. But the reality was it was the other way around for us. And so, we work with a number of brands who, when they were thinking about success, we pretty quickly learned that you can't really judge everything with the same metrics. It doesn't work. But if you don't judge them with any metrics, it also doesn't work. So there was a lot of time on our side spent thinking about is it possible to basically do both, and then how does one impact the other, right? And as an organization and as myself, we've been involved in a number of causes and nonprofits and all the things along the way. And I was always anxious for more data about what was working, on those that I've been more personally involved in. I was just the guy who was constantly asking, like, okay, how do we know that that's working? Is that thing working? And there was a lot of times where the answer was, well, it's what we've always done. So we our vibes say it's working. So we kind of set out to figure out, is there a way for us to treat the activism side of the business similar to how we treat digital commerce or even branding on a digital landscape? And I think we've spent the last few years trying to figure out how to do it.
To that end, I mean, you use the word kind of vibe check, but I do think that sometimes when we're in more of that activism space, we feel like we're having an impact. And I think a lot of storytelling tends to be very heartfelt. And then at the same time, you need that data driven, which is almost the flip side of that sometimes. And how have you managed to draw that intersection between the two? Because I think that's really the sweet spot, is where you can speak to somebody's emotions through that impact, but then you can also prove that you're having that. So how have you navigated in finding that crossroad between those two aspects?
Yeah, well, I would say, the storytelling is crucial to how much these brands connect with their audience. Brands, nonprofits, causes, activism, however it might be. Storytelling is going to be a huge way that is going to happen. But I think the mistake that a lot of brands make is when they say, well, if we just create a story that we intrinsically feel is really good, we'll have a better feel on whether or not the audience felt the same way. And I think there's likely a better metric, no matter what the format is of how you're telling that story, whether that's long form or in annual reports or that's in video. I think there's probably something that will tell you how to make it work a little bit better if you're willing to look. The one of the challenges I would say that I think you see most, other than just the process and the data side of things, is like if you're a nonprofit or if you're an activism forward brand, a lot of times what happens is you put so much energy into getting that report out the door. And then there's just like nothing after that, right? It's like, okay, well, we have our ESG report, or we're going to put a report on our impact on the climate from the year before. And there is thousands of hours that get put into something like that. And then it goes out the door and people go, like, I can breathe now, right? And there's not a ton of incentive to necessarily go look and see whether it actually had the impact that you wanted it to or not. But I think the brands who are doing it best treat it as a little bit more of an always-on storytelling approach. It's really hard to do if it's once a year you're trying to put out this report or this story. It's a whole lot easier to do if it's something that's continually evolving over time and you're thinking about ways to repurpose it. So, yeah, I would say most often we see that there is some information there, but you have to be willing to look, and there's probably a better metric regardless of what one you're using today, right? A lot of times it's just, well, we had a lot of people download this thing, this PDF that we had, or we had a ton of views on our, video telling this narrative about the impact that we're having. But those metrics are pretty flawed, and we think there's likely better ones to go look for.
I felt that in my soul when you said about the ESG report of just so many people I've spoken to who are sustainability experts your entire team just works so hard to get it across the finish line. And then it's just, oh, thank goodness we don't have to think about that for 364. Well, that's not true. You don't put it together the day before, but it is such a crunch at the end to get your numbers that I don't think we always think about it in the same way that we would for a general marketing campaign, to your point, where it's always on. You're always thinking about how we communicate it. I do want to double click into the term activism, because I think that has probably had a different kind of interpretation depending on who you're speaking to. So I've heard you mention it a couple of times. I just want to double click into that for our audience. Are we thinking companies that are taking a stance on certain things? Are we thinking more of those extreme kind of activisms? I just want to make sure, because I think words are important and we're kind of using that as our baseline.
Yeah, sure. Typically I would say for us, I would advocate for even the most extreme activists in the world. There's probably a way to measure the impact that they're having better than they're doing today. However, I would say for most of the time when I'm referring to it, we're thinking about brands and companies for whom a social cause is an important part of who they are, and something that they likely commit to over time, repeatedly, and maybe always doesn't necessarily tie directly to more sales or more profits. So, when I talk about activism or values-led brands, it's the ones that you think of, but I would say most often it's companies for whom they are making decisions about the impact that they want to have that are not always solely driven by the bottom line. And I am not a person who believes those things are mutually exclusive, right? Like, we are here to help companies figure out how to do more, sell more, make more, but also hopefully have that same level of success on the impact that they seek to have, regardless of what the cause that might be.
And when those companies are trying to think about having that positive impact and to have the activism elements or the values-based work, how do you help kind of coach your customers in terms of, like, is it actually resonating with their customer base versus maybe just creating noise or confusion with but they're actually trying to sell. Like, what I think it's kind of a fine line as to the end of the day when you're showing up in the market. Is it just an extra layer of noise, or is it complementary to what the business is standing for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's best when it's complementary to what the business is standing for, right? Like it feels more authentic. And, the kind of simple way that I like to sort of check that is like a simple virtue signaling check where when somebody says, yeah, we're really supportive of whatever, right? Mothers in the workforce, veterans, climate change, Happy Earth Day, whatever. If you just ask the following question, so tell me how, what are some of your efforts? What do they look like for you guys? And you'd be amazed that like a lot of times folks think that their efforts can just be the words that they say. And I would say to do it authentically and to do it in a real manner, there has to be some action behind it, right? It can't just be as simple as, well, we believe in climate justice because we said climate justice 7 times last year, right? Like it's if you're going to be values forward or activism forward, there has to be some action behind it. It can't be just the words. The words do matter, but not as much as the action, especially when it's coming to try and champion a specific cause, I would say.
Completely agree with you. And I think some of this is a symptom of maybe so many brands about 5-6 years ago. So we're recording this in 2025, coming out and maybe saying things, but the action not necessarily following. But at the same time, I do think that the pendulum has swung perhaps even further than expected over the past few years. How is that translated to your work with your clients? And are you seeing them having to be very almost cautious about what they do share? Are they, we've talked about green hushing before on the podcast. Are you seeing that with any of your customers?
Yeah, for sure. I would say the pendulum has definitely swung pretty far in the opposite direction. And, it's a little bit self-serving, but I would say now more than ever, I think it's important to be able to quantify the impact that you're having. And so having an impact strategy that is tangible and is measurable, I think is more important than ever, because what you're seeing in leadership is the risk averse, especially the bigger the company, right? The bigger the company, the more risk averse leadership is going to be, whether that's the executive level or the board level. And so to champion a cause and to jump into something, you have to be able to quantify why that matters and why that's worth doing. And I will say that I don't think it's always just, well, it's because it's the right thing to do is enough of an answer. We live in a capitalist society. We live in a world where most executives are compensated based on profits. So the answer is not help people become more altruistic. I think it's help figure out how doing good and selling more can work together, or selling better, or getting folks involved in the right use of your product in a way that is more advantageous for both you and potentially the planet, right? There's a lot of hesitation today. That's real, right? Even some of the more progressive brands that are out there is a tendency to pull back a little bit. And I would say for the folks who we work with who are navigating it best, they're navigating it by being able to connect the purpose and the profits more tangibly, so that they can say to an executive, sure, we could say less, but let me show you how our brand is activated by saying more, right? Yes, we could be quiet. We could literally post less. We could say words that are not as specific and maybe as strong. But let me show you why that might actually have a negative impact on the amount of things that we sell, or the number of people who are willing to follow us as a brand, or the people who are going to engage with us in the long term. So I think more than ever, it's important to be able to kind of articulate the why. And I think that there's a lot of very well-intentioned brands who have lost their way because the why was altruistic and it was good-hearted, but not tied much to the purpose of the business. And, there's a lot of examples of when this goes really well, it works in both directions, right? Patagonia puts out an ad that says, don't buy this jacket. And then they sell a bunch more stuff, right? They do that and they say, hey, make sure you recycle this. They launch their um, worn wear collection to kind of encourage people to buy used clothes. Well, that not only has the impact of maybe encouraging people to buy something, even though it's used, but it also sort of says something about the quality and what they believe in their product, right? So I think the more it's connected and it feels authentic, the more likely it is to get to kind of hang around, and the more it feels bolted on, like, hey, this is what we're doing for National Women's Month or Veterans Day or Black History Month. Show me how. And if you know how, if you have a how, then it's likely you can articulate that story in a way that's going to resonate. If your how is, and here's a stock picture of our diverse workforce or of a woman working in our office, like, okay, well, that's not a how. That's a stock image of a person working in an office, right? So it's hard to virtue signal check yourself, but I think it's important that you do, right? And for brands, especially, because honestly, I think where most get in trouble is when they dive into conversations that they weren't even really prepared to be in, right? You have to be prepared to jump into the conversations you're going to jump into. And when you're not, that's when you get out over your skis and you don't know what you're doing. And then the executives say, okay, we're going to shut this whole thing down. And I have to talk through the downsides up front if you want to have the legitimacy internally,
I think that's huge. And hopefully that's part of the pendulum swinging in both directions so far, is that maybe we'll spark some of those conversations earlier before people get out too far in advance. But I think another factor, so there's certainly the current messaging climate, but then there's also, I think, the macroeconomic environment where there's a little bit of instability. Certainly, we're not really sure. We're in a bit of a boom, but are we in a bubble? And as a result, you're seeing some companies also just having to get a little bit more tight on their budgets. So I would love to know your thoughts too, as CMOs or whoever is responsible for these different programs. It could be the ESG team, have all of these different programs in place. They've successfully managed to tie it to their strategies. However, budget cuts are coming up. Are there any tools? It sounds like it's probably leaning back into that data, but that you can equip them with, or that you can get our listeners thinking about, that can maybe help build a little bit of a moat around the different programs they have in place.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a challenge worth thinking about today. And, my first recommendation is always like, just be prepared for those questions to be asked, because for nearly all companies, you're the first that are going to be the most likely to go, right? You're going to be thought of as a little bit of a nice to have rather than a must have. And I would say that a lot of even the ESG folks in the organization sometimes are a little bit wary of, oh no, we're not marketing. They're like a little higher brow than that almost, we're not marketers. We're not trying to sell you anything. And I just think that's the wrong way to approach it. You have an opportunity to quantify the impact that you're having. And if you can't quantify it, then there's good reasons for people to ask the questions about what you're doing, right? So a couple more tactical, less nonsense thoughts there would be like, one is measure it as if it's not activism, right? Measure it up as if it's not values, because then you can start to be able to say, well, we're functioning like a performance marketing team, even though our thing we're marketing is our efforts, our impact, our activism. And they can say, we know how to most efficiently spend money. We know where we save money. We know where our content has the longest legs. We know which formats tend to get the most distribution. We can understand which platforms algorithm works best with our message and our audience. The more you can do that, the easier it is to have tough conversations. And I think a lot of times there's this instinct of like, no, but that's too in the weeds for us. We're trying to save the world, man. We're trying to save the world. Well, sure, you're trying to save the world. Tell me which platform works best for you and your world-saving techniques, right? Tell me which style of content the message has the most resonance with. Tell me which advertising opportunities, paid media spend, like where are you most effective? And then you can come in and say, if we had to drop something, here's the thing I would recommend us dropping. We don't know if this whatever 100-page PDF is the thing for us anymore. We have a way to approach it differently, where we're going to take that same content and turn it into 100 smaller pieces of content, syndicate it out to the world. I think you got to be ready to pivot, and you got to be ready to answer the hard questions. But the biggest mistake is just assuming you're unquestionable because you're well intentioned, right? And I don't think it'll work anymore. I think good intentions are really helpful when the times are really good and everybody wants to be involved and the economy is crushing and we're all feeling a little bit more socially active than normal, and then the pendulum swings and maybe the economy's not doing as well, and maybe companies are seeing disinvestment in DEI and ESG and a bunch of different things. And okay, well, now you have to be ready to have hard conversations. And I think the more willing you are, more likely you'll get to sort of come through on the other side.
I think you're spot on there. And in terms of those measurement metrics, do you see any common mistakes with companies and leaders that are trying to, I feel like just with data, I work in building data space, so there's so much data coming in, but for any space, but especially when you're trying to look at performance metrics, it can sometimes feel overwhelming. And I'm curious if you've seen any common patterns in terms of mistakes that people are making with those metrics of just maybe they're looking at the wrong things and trying to communicate the wrong things.
Yeah. Well, luckily for us, the mistakes are pretty similar to what they've been in the kind of corporate, more traditional marketing world forever. So I would say the two things that you see most often are too many data points and too many dashboards. There's this idea behind both that more is always better, and more probably is not better. And it likely makes making a decision or taking an action harder. So the key to getting there is to try to decide that for you up front. So we start all of our engagements with a workshop, and we try to go as analog as possible, like literally Post-it notes and on a wall, and make people write things down and stick it on the wall and move it around. And one of the exercises I love about that is pretty predictable at this point now, but we'll go and we'll say, okay, for our activism content that is designed to pull in email addresses or get people to sign petitions or do a thing, if we could have people do one thing, what would it be, right? And we literally just map out behaviors, right? Oh, we would love to have them subscribe and forward it to a friend or whatever, right? Like you come up with your ideal engagement. And then we just start mapping all the other additional things out. So then you might end up with 10 or 15 metrics for that category. And then I'll say, okay, great. I'm going to leave the room. I'll come back. Can you strip away 7 of those 10? Let's get it down to 3, right? And it just sort of makes people sort of recognize in advance that if we try to measure everything, we'll essentially measure nothing. Because if you measure everything, there is always a number that says you're doing the right thing. Oh, look how many impressions we had, or page views we got, or downloads, or whatever, right? Those might not be the thing you're actually after. The most classic example I would say today, we annoyingly use the word consumption a lot on our team, especially when we're talking to values forward brands. And what I mean by that is content consumption, like how much time did people spend reading or consuming your actual content? And the main mistake I see is that folks look at the biggest number first, right? So to look at views. Platforms are incentivized to tell you a view is a view is a view, whether you viewed that literally 0.001 second or 17 minutes. And those experiences are so disparate and distinct that assuming they have any correlation to how much impact you're having on the world or on your audience or on your brand, it's a fallacy, right? So I would say our token recommendation is always get rid of views as a primary metric, get rid of page views, video views as a primary metric, and try to come up with something more consumptive. That might look like the total engaged time on page. That might look like the total amount of video views spent watching, or it might be a macro, right? Like literally how many days, months, or weeks of video content were consumed to this specific video, regardless of how many people did it. It gives me kind of a little bit of a qualitative and quantitative at the same time. So it's pretty nerdy and we're in the weeds a little bit, but like I just would say avoid the glamour metrics. And in the corporate world, the like hippo analogy, which is basically that you'll always end up using the metric that the hippos like the best, and the hippo is the highest paid person's opinion, and they like the big numbers, right? So you'll end up saying, look at 1,000,000 views or page views, or look at, we got 200 million impressions. Okay, sure, but so did the billboard that I drove by. And, I mean, it's not relevant, right? So if you're trying to have an impact, there's probably a metric that's a little bit deeper. And the more you can get people aligned on that, the better, but you have to align them on that upfront. Because if you just at the end say, let me show you why we don't do views anymore, there's going to be a lot of pushback, because these executives and these leaders don't have the time and the capacity to just understand these metrics in detail. And B, they're going to think you're just pointing them to some metric that makes you look good, right? So if you can get some consensus that feels like they played a role, all the people involved, entry level to senior level, played a role in determining what we were going to care about, then when you report on that, you kind of have this built-in thing where I can come back and I can say, hey, I know that one had the most page views, but remember you guys actually said page views were less important, right? So let's make sure we remember that, because we don't want to spend our time saying this piece of the content did so good if it's not a metric that we really believe in, or maybe it's a metric that works in some cases but just doesn't in others.
You're so right that a lot of it is change management, and I'm sure bringing them along on the way, on the path, and feeling that they're part of the decision is always really important. Do you have any specific moments looking back with your customers where you felt like, okay, I was really able to bring them along on this journey? It was a big shift for them, but that you were able to bring them along on that journey of really being able to lean into the values-based work, but then lean into it with that hybrid approach of both the storytelling and the data?
Yeah, I do. We have a client we've been working with a long time, and one of their challenges was not necessarily getting the institutional support for being values led, right? They it's kind of core to who they are, and have always been. But understanding how that played a role in the more traditional side of their business was just kind of a black box. And we started looking deep, and I was really excited when they come to us with really good questions. I'm really excited. I know we've won at that point, right? When they say, well, what should stuff look like if we do a new flavor launch, or if we launch this new line of environmentally friendly, construction materials or whatever, right? If they come in asking good questions, I know we've kind of made it over the hill, because the data can give us good answers to the questions. But in this case, they came and said, hey, what do we know about the value when we have a really engaging values activism forward post? What happens to the more traditional posts that happen right after that, sequentially to that? And so we did this whole study where we really looked at, well, when we have a activism post and it really crushes, we get all this algorithmic reach, is there an uptick on that follow-on post? And now we look at it continually. It's really cool. So we can start to see, all right, I literally posted this product shot 2 times with the exact same content at the exact same type of day. And the distinguishing factor between why one got twice the reach is that the post before kind of had already juiced the algorithm, because it was really engaging their audience in a strong way, right? So we call it the halo effect, but this idea of basically being able to make tangible not only the impact that you're having in each silo, but how one impacts the other. And I think I was just so excited when we got the kind of question like that, because it sort of says, all right, we're past the which page got the most page views kind of questions, right? And you start there, right? You're going to start on a journey where people have an idea in mind about what they want to report on, and they may have actually been using those as guideposts for a decade. And so it can be hard to let people loosen up some of those glamour metrics. And so I don't actually recommend you go and you say, we're never going to report on that again. I say, let's put it on the board, but let's just decide where you want it ranked. Do we actually care about page views? Because I have this other metrics that's much more accurate about how much time is going to be spent actually reading the content. Wouldn't that be better, right? So, if you're giving an ESG report and your metric is PDF downloads, it's a black box, right? Because I don't have any idea if they saw the cover photo, whether they hit download and it went to their downloads folder, they never opened it again, right? It's just not really a good indicator of success. And yet, if your brand has been committed to creating this big, beautiful report for a decade, I wouldn't go in recommending on day one, you say like, maybe let's not do that format at all. We can measure it better if we take it off, right? You're going to scare people a little bit. So
yeah, I love the idea too, though, of the halo effect. I think we've known for anybody who's been in values-based work for a number of years, like, there is a halo effect, but the fact that algorithms now demonstrate that in a quantifiable way is so interesting, that like there's that engagement that then spills over positively afterwards. You're so passionate about this topic, and I love it. I think it's what we need is to be able to kind of have that data-driven element. You're mentioning you started more on the classic brand side and were able to bring this over, but what did this journey look like for you professionally, and kind of bringing this, I would say, pretty unique lens to the market in this conversation?
I started, my story is sort of traditional in that I started my company LooseGrip 2008-ish, 9, kind of economy downturn, agency I worked for shut down. And actually one of our teammates today who's been working with me the whole time also was at that agency. And, I'd sort of already been applying for jobs. I didn't really like the job I had. And so I'd been applying aggressively for a long time. So I knew that getting a new job was not going to be easy. And maybe starting a business would be a little bit easier, honestly. But I also knew that I had to be able to make sure we had kind of a distinction about who we were. And at the time, social media was pretty new. Marketing analytics were pretty new. I'd love to tell you a story that I've been passionate about data for 35 years. That's not the case, right? The reality is it was something that I saw as super important, and that it wasn't as busy of a space, right? Like if I wanted to be a branding expert, there was, you could throw a rock and hit one out your window in 2008 who was looking for a new job. But there was less folks trying to really quantify, and the data was coming in faster and faster. We were learning a whole lot more. I mean, things like Google Analytics didn't even exist, right? And so we take for granted a lot of that data today, but at that point in time, it was definitely more of a push this out the door and then we call it good. We hope it worked, right? And so it gave me a chance to jump in there. And then we were lucky to work with, like I said, some brands who kind of pushed us to sort of think. It was surprising to me when we first started engaging with companies who were not saying, tell us how we can make more money. Tell us how we can sell more of this thing. And so once we started having the luxury of working with some brands who were really thinking deeply about their impact, but also how to create these long-term relationships, it became clear that's who we want to work with, right? There's the people that we wanted to work with. And so we just kind of have been doubling down every chance we can to work with people who give a shit. And because if they do, there's a really interesting corollary, which is that if you really truly care about the impact that you're having, you're much more likely to be willing to have candid conversations about what's not working. And in a corporate environment, talk about change management, right? Like the biggest challenge is getting people to say out loud when something didn't work. If you go talk to any marketer who's launched a campaign, I bet they'll tell you about their last 10 campaigns, and amazing, they were all a success, right? And that's not just an individual's challenge, right? That's an organizational sort of environmental factor that makes people sort of have to be pumping themselves up the whole time. But when you work with companies who really want to have an impact and they actually truly believe it, they're also willing to say, "Oh shit, that didn't work. That wasn't the thing that really worked for us." And sometimes the best learnings we have been from companies and brands and content when something just doesn't hit the way they want it to. And we learn as much, if not more, from those than we do of like, here's another slide that says everybody's amazing, right? Like we learn more when someone come and say, oh man, we launched that thing, but nobody wanted it. Nobody downloaded it. Nobody spent any time engaging with it. They were really turned off. Maybe it was the message, maybe it was the format, maybe it was the style, right? So I don't know. It's a long-winded way of saying I think we liked working with companies who care. And if you care, you're likely like you have a decent appetite for understanding how your efforts are working. And working with companies who care is really not the standard, right? Like everybody cares, but I think working with really enthusiastic, authentic brands means that they want to have an impact and they're willing to look themselves in the eyes if they're not.
To have those real conversations at the end of the day. Yeah. It's interesting because you're coaching your customers to think both analytically and creatively. How do you bring that, and do you bring that to your day-to-day as well? Like I find sometimes when we're so busy kind of coaching customers in a certain direction, then to then think back, am I managing to do this myself? Do you feel like you're able to strike that balance personally and professionally as well between those two worlds?
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. We run both of our companies, both Grasp and LooseGrip, on kind of like a entrepreneurial operating system. There's a program called Traction, which actually a bunch of nonprofits that we work with run on the Traction system as well. It's just sort of like a operating system for your business. Sets up, tells you how to have your quarterly meetings and your yearly meetings and your monthly meetings, and they roll up, cascade into your goals. And it's a really great planning tool, but it's pretty analytical, right? And, you know, we want this specific metric, this profit margin, this number of inbound X, Y, or Z, right? It can kind of turn into this very data heavy, a little bit soulless kind of way to run a company and be a company. And pretty quickly, I figured out that I just was not that interested in being solely that, right? Like just focusing on the data. So two things we do. One is we try to sort of quantify the unquantifiable by just sort of saying, all right, we know this quarter we want to have 5, our word for it's a little bit more profane, but magic moments, right? Something where we're sort of saying, all going like, that was just awesome, right? That was really fun. It could be a presentation. It could be an internal meeting. It could be we all got together and had dinner. It could be anything. And it's just like a feeling. Did we get that feeling? And you're trying to quantify the feeling, not saying, well, that was a 78 rather than a 64, right? It's more just saying, and you can kind of, your gut can tell you when you're having those. When you had like a meeting you got done with and the team was like, man, we really crushed, right? Like no notes. So we try to systematize creating opportunities for those situations, right? And we say, okay, well, what are the commonalities? When do we feel like we're doing that? Well, we feel like we're doing that when we're presenting to the right people and we're presenting to the types of clients who are excited about what we have to say. If we can make people laugh, right? Like it's, when you're running a data company, for lack of better words, right? Like people don't expect you to be a very entertaining, session. And I would say we like to try really hard to just get people to be surprised. And like our goals are less in like, do we have the best KPI for new customer acquisition for our agency? And more like, can we get somebody to say that was the best meeting of their quarter, right? Like we just literally want somebody to say something a little bit more fluff, but that has a really solid feel to it. The other way is just when we hire, we have 100 token agency questions and clever Google, annoying Google formulas and stuff that we ask people to dive into. But typically somebody will get interviewed 3 times. And if all 3 people have to basically just say, heck yes, right? Like not, yeah, I think I could talk myself into this person being on our team, or I want to get over my reservation. It's just like full-throated. We have to all want that. And that's not tangible. There's not a metric for that. It's just like there's 100 other metrics that might actually convince me to not think about that. But if we just like write it down and we all kind of say, yeah, it sounds like we don't all have that feeling, it's pretty easy to know the right answer,
When you're building that team and you're building that culture, certainly a lot relies on you as well, I think, as the entrepreneur to be constantly bringing that energy and making sure the team is aligned. It's often, from a lot of the entrepreneurs I speak to on this show, it's often a question as well of like refueling yourself. So over the years since you've started this, obviously the economy has gone up, down, sideways. There was just a little thing called the pandemic in the middle of all of this. But how have you continued to kind of feed into yourself so that you can really support your team on this next level?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think one that I've been spending more time thinking about over the last 5 years. We want we want our team to all have good lives, right? We want them to take vacation when they want to take vacation and skip out of meetings because their kids got to play at school and, do all the things. And it's really easy to not do any of that for yourself, right? Like when you're in it. And so, I am a very analytical person when it comes to thinking about that stuff. So I try to literally just make it as if the goal for me is utilizing that flexibility and that lifestyle flexibility that I have, right? So to me, when I know I'm getting burned out, I can pretty quickly go look at my calendar and be like, man, you have not spent any time outside. You have not taken a day to just do not this. I try to program my Wednesday afternoons. I don't use the internet at all. That's super helpful and refreshing. That's a luxury of having a team that's really strong. That was definitely not always the case, right? I was answering emails at 2 a.m. when I was first started the company. But I think recognizing that work-life balance is about doing both well more than it is just like trying to find the right amount of either. It's like, I want to live a lot. I want to do a lot. I don't mind working a lot. If it's the right kind of work, I'm energized by it, working with the right kinds of brands, the right kinds of people. We have tried really hard to be really forward and decisive about making sure we work with the right types of companies. And I would say that goes a really long way. I will dive into the weeds here a little bit. My wife and I lost our son 18 months ago. And he was
so sorry.
4.5. Yeah, thank you. And so I would say running a company when you're in the midst of heinous traumatic grief is pretty impossible. But not one of our clients was impatient. They took their time. They're people we've worked with for a long time. They took their time. They weren't upset about, meetings getting canceled. And, there was multiple like workshops where I typically do the most of the stuff where I was just texting somebody the day before saying, can't do it. I thought I could spend 60 days or 90 days. I can't do it. Right. And so I would say part of work-life balance is just being able to work with people that you enjoy being around. And that pays itself off when you need it to, right? And for me, that need was just not having capacity to care at all about the business or anybody's marketing needs or their KPIs, right? I just didn't have it in me, right? And I didn't have anybody really push on that at all. And I think I would have reacted pretty defensively if anybody was sort of rushing me to get back to it, whether that was on my team or my clients. And I didn't really have any of that. So there was a lot of empathy that I felt from folks, and they were really supportive. And still to this day, there's days where I have to space out on a thing. And it probably means I've been not doing that enough, right? Where I should have just gone for a walk, taken the dogs for a walk or something, skipped out on a meeting. Most of the time, those meetings end up being fine without me. Like we entrepreneurs, I would say one of the big mistakes we all make is we kind of overstate our own value. We overthink our own value in every interaction. This could never work without me. I didn't really do any work for 4 or 5 months. Everything was fine. There was some like random billing stuff that you just figured out was on, not on autopilot, but like, it was all fine. That wasn't that important. And I think if you build a really good team and you have really trusting client partnerships, people will see that they get more out of you if you're refreshed, right? If you have a client who can't see that, then they probably can't see it for themselves. They probably can't see it for their colleagues. There's a guy, going to butcher his name. Stefan Sengenmeyer, I believe. He's got a TED Talk about, he's kind of like a design with a capital D design firm, right? Like big branding, highbrow campaigns. And every 7 years, he takes a year off and he just goes and he shuts down the whole company for a year. And he says that on the 8th year, when he comes back, he's got more work than he can handle and he's totally rejuvenated. And he generally finds a way to bring a new skill set to life, a new understanding, right? Like he'll go make furniture in Bali for a year or something, right? Like, and I'm definitely not doing anything that cool, but the intent, I think, is there, right? Which is like, I believe we all do better work if we get a break. And so
100%.
you have to live that, especially if you want the people on your team to believe it, because otherwise they'll just work as hard as they can because they think that's what you want and that's the answer. And working more or harder is often not the answer.
They absolutely set the tone. And I think your lived experience really sounds like it's a testament to the ecosystem that you've built around you. So I think that's so important and something for us all to keep in mind, just kind of supporting each other, I think, as well, and building that ecosystem around us, certainly for the business leaders who are listening in, the entrepreneurs who are listening in. We also have a number of students who listen, or soon-to-be graduates, and when I speak to some of them, it's interesting. I think kind of the data science side of marketing or business is becoming more front and center, certainly than in 2008 when you were saying you started the agency. But I think they're starting to think about that piece, but then they're also interested in the sustainability piece. If they are trying to build up that muscle and skill set, is there anything that you've seen on your team, perhaps in hiring, that you feel like is really important for them to think about as they're trying to maybe find a career similar to yours at that intersection?
I would say, this is cliched to say today, I'm sure many people have said it on this particular podcast, but the skill set people need is storytelling, right? Regardless of what it is that you're trying to do. And I would say the data practitioners are going to be commoditized. And what I mean by that is AI is coming for all of our jobs, and data science is definitely one of them, right? I just think about how we use it and how much manual labor at our company has been able to be eliminated. Just, kind of menial sorting of data sets and cleaning things up. That stuff has been really cleaned up and is so much more effective today than it was even a year ago or 2 years ago. So building on a skill set that is essentially fighting to be smarter than the robots, I think, is a losing battle. But storytelling and making emotional connection and learning how to use data to tell stories is really, really, it's a skill set that will help you no matter what your job is. So a couple more tangible things I would say, or tactical. There is a free series of events called Measure Camps. They're kind of an unconference style. They happen in most major cities in the world, actually. And the style is basically, they're a free event and people can give a talk about whatever. So you show up at it. It's an unconference style, which basically means you show up and you write what your talk's going to be about and you write what level of thing it's going to be. And you put your post-it up and say, I'm going to be in this note, or I'm going to be in this room at 11:30. Going through that process, even first just as a viewer, but very quickly into trying to do it, learning how to synthesize information in a way that can come across in a narrative format is a skill that is just so powerful. There's also something called a channel called Data Viz, which is sort of like a Reddit community, honestly. It's a really neat community. You see people like who are taking data sets that are not theirs and telling stories with them. And, it's a funny story for that is we do a fair amount of work with Ben and Jerry's, and one of our contractors for a different project, the way we found her is she had just done this storytelling thing with a bunch of Ben and Jerry's data that was publicly available, not because they asked her to, right? Just because she was a 20-year-old in college coming up with a thing. So we were able to find her and see work that she had done. And you don't have to ask permission. The data's there, right? Like you can do really cool stuff. And she was part of they call these Iron Viz. They're like a Tableau, which is one of the data platforms, a competition to see who can kind of tell the story the fastest using data. It's a really neat way to do it. So both of those two, I would say, are sharpen your ability to tell a story and sharpen your ability to present that story effectively. And the only way you can do that is by doing it a lot. If you are building dashboards, I promise you are not long for the world in your career, right? Like those things we are so much closer today to saying like 4 clicks, here's my dashboard, right? But communicating in a way that is influential and persuasive, that's the stuff that's going to, I think, still win,
I love both of those recommendations because I think, well, one piece, the hiring, like it can also get your name out there as a potential candidate. You never know where you might get spotted on this. And then also, because I do think of AI and the storytelling, there is some homogenization that's happening right now of leaning into AI for storytelling, but it doesn't replace in person. There's nothing that is as hard, I think, as doing that public speaking. So those are great tips. Are you working on any specific projects right now that you're really excited about and that you can share publicly with our listeners?
We did some work. I used to chair the board of this foundation called the I'm Able Foundation, and they do essentially inclusive and adaptive fitness for special needs kids, mostly anywhere up to age maybe 25 or so. And we just work with them to relaunch this program where they essentially have these kids get to become these fitness classes, right? And then the kids get to become the coaches over time. And so we have these fitness coaches that come in and they basically mentor these typically like any number of disabilities. It could be a physical disability, it could be a mental, cognitive, and they come in and they teach these classes. And these kids, getting to see these kids with like a headset on and coaching a bunch of other kids, and the amount of confidence that they get from it is like this. I don't know. I'm just super proud of the programs generally. It was something that we put in place while I was on the board, and now they've really rolled them out. And, to talk to the quantifying numbers of it, I would say one of the things I'm most proud of is that I'm not actively on the board any longer, but they still will reach out and sort of ask for support. And one of the missions that I had there was, let's make the support feel quantifiable. And so now what's great is when I get a letter from them or an ask from them that says, hey, if you donate $100, that's going to get 7 kids through a class, right? Like you're putting a number on the thing that helps people really engage. And so that intersection of data storytelling, it can be about impact, right? And you need the thing, especially because we live in this world where if you are in a space, especially on the nonprofit side, the old adage is that everybody wants to build a school, but nobody wants to hire a teacher. And so there's lots of donations that will go to the physical things, right? If we need an adaptive playground, help us raise $100,000, right? You get a lot of support. So finding a way to narratively in a storytelling fashion make the sort of more soft, whether it's classes or support or programming, making them feel a little bit more tangible, allows people to invest in them and to support them and support the programs they are. So I would say a lot of times, especially on the activism side, if you're saving the planet through drilling wells in sub-Saharan Africa, that's great. But you also need to find some ways to bring stories to the other impacts that you're having that people can then support, right? Because like eventually you don't need to drill more wells. You need to run a system and a team and a, thing. So being able to kind of bring the impact front and center by putting a number on it, I think is really powerful. And I'm psyched every time I get something from these guys, because I'm like, you see these inspiring videos of kids who are just so much more confident when they walk out of the room than they were when they walked into it. And that level of like enthusiasm is just something that's hard to see. Like these kids are just more enthusiastic than anybody you or I deal with it, on a daily basis. And like, it's pretty contagious.
Yeah, that pure authentic enthusiasm for sure. Well, I know at this point our listeners are going to absolutely want to check out your work. Where would be the best place for them to learn about LooseGrip?
Sure. Well, LooseGrip is loosegrip.net, LOOSEGRIP. And our activism framework is called GRASP, and you can find that at graspyorimpact.com. And I'm on LinkedIn and all the places. Feel free to connect with me. I was excited to hear how folks are doing anything good in the world. I think we can all learn a lot from each other.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Neil. I do want to ask you one final question, which we ask all of our guests, which is, what do you think it will take for businesses and leaders to be resilient going forward?
It will be cliched, but I'll say data and willingness to look for not only the good stuff, right? A willingness to look at what the numbers are telling you and don't look away when they start telling you something doesn't really look that great. So a willingness not to look away, I guess.
Thank you so much, Neil. I could have talked to you. This hour flew by. I could have continued talking to you for so much more. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I hope that you've enjoyed this week's edition of the Resilience Report. If you would like to hear and see more, be sure to check out @The Resilience Report on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until we connect again, remember, even on the darkest of days, we all have the opportunity to be a lighthouse for others as we collectively pursue better, more resilient business.